Please welcome the co-chairs of the National Young Leadership Cabinet, Alexandra Feinstein and Scott Golden.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Alex and I are honored. Sorry, one sec. Good afternoon. Alex and I are honored to be with all of you, leaders from across North America and Israel who care deeply about our collective Jewish future. This room represents the power of a community that invests not only in today's challenges, but in the leaders who will face tomorrow's.
And that's why this year's General Assembly is especially meaningful. We are proud there is such a strong showing of this year's young leaders. This includes Jewish changemakers who are learning about their role in shaping the next generation of Jewish communal leadership, more than 60 extraordinary young adults in their 20s who are stepping forward, engaging seriously with the issues facing our people, and already making an impact in communities and organizations.
We're also thrilled to welcome over 50 students here through a new partnership track with Hillel International, and another 50 students also here from the Montreal Jewish Federations. These students represent the hope, courage, and creativity that our community needs, especially in a time when campus life has become increasingly complex. We believe they will become the leaders, advocates, and visionaries of our communities for decades to come, and we're so grateful they chose to spend these 2 days here learning with us.
And of course, we want to acknowledge our National Young Leadership Cabinet members, those who have dedicated years to honing their leadership, deepening their connection to Federation, and modeling what it means to lead with values and purpose. We're equally proud to have with us several recipients of Young Leadership Awards from federations across the continent. You inspire us, and you remind us just how strong the pipeline of talent and commitment truly is.
When young leaders are not only welcomed, but empowered, our community becomes more vibrant, more resilient, and more prepared to face the future challenges. Thank you for being part of this moment. Your presence here matters, and your leadership matters.
We are now pleased to welcome someone who also began their Jewish leadership journey as a member of National Young Leadership Cabinet. He is the past chair of the Jewish Federations of North America. He is an incredible leader from my own community, Greater Metro West, and that's New Jersey, if you didn't know, and the current chairman of the Board of Governors of the Jewish Agency for Israel. Please welcome Mark Wilf.
Good afternoon, everyone. These past 2 years have been among the most difficult in the history of the Jewish state and the Jewish people. In Israel, we've been dealing with an ongoing war. Israelis displaced from their homes, reservists away from their families and businesses, physical rebuilding in the north and the south, mental health challenges, and much, much more. Our country is just beginning the long process of rehabilitation, and the Jewish Agency for Israel is out in front, leading that process. However, while Israel deals with the challenges that have resulted from October 7th, Jewish communities around the world are also dealing with the aftermath of the war in Gaza and the dramatic rise in anti-Semitism. Nowhere is that crisis more obvious than on college campuses around the world. Over a decade ago, the Jewish Agency identified college campuses as a strategic front in the fight against anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, and in partnership with Hillel International, placed shlichim on college campuses across North America called Israel Fellows. These young men and women represent the Jewish Agency and the State of Israel on college campuses, serving as a vital bridge for our young people seeking to understand Israel, engage with Israel, ask questions about Israel, and even challenge Israel. Today, we have 121 of these fellows across the world engaging with students during the most important years of their lives. We have invited two of these Jewish Agency campus shlichim to share their stories. Please welcome Bar and Matan.
Being a shaliach is creating a bridge. I always say that it's a two-way bridge. People are crossing from both sides. We have an impact as Israelis on American Jews, and American Jews have impact on us. On October 7th, I was at home in my apartment here in Nashville. I was doubting, what do I need to do here? Like, what is my role here? But then I came to the office. There was a student that asked if I can give her a hug and she can cry. She said that she doesn't feel like she have the right to be sad because she doesn't have any connection to Israel. That's where I also started to understand that I actually do have a meaning here. I have a role here now. I wanted to be a part of their critical thinking, their journey of learning and knowing about Israel and connecting Israel from different narratives.
Since day one, the Jewish community around the world started to support us. This is my time to kind of pay back and to help them. I really wanted to work with college students because I knew that they are the next generation of leaders here in the state. A lot of them had a really hard time after October 7 because a lot of their friends started to abandon them. I feel like now I'm making this a really safe place for them.
We have a lot to give here. We are always talking about building this bridge. Our bridge cannot only be built on disasters. It cannot just be built about that because we are built from strength and relationships and hope.
After army service, I found myself searching for community. I attend college in the Western Negev, where I discovered Kibbutz Nachal Oz. It became my home, my community. I was adopted by one of the oldest family on the kibbutz, and quickly they all became family. As you can imagine, October 7th destroyed that sense of peace for me and for the entire community. The tragedy became very personal, as friends, and even a member of my adoptive family, Ilan Fiorentino Zichrono Livracha, were murdered. Nachal Oz was evacuated to the north, and I became the kibbutz official spokesperson, sharing our story of devastation and rebuilding. The Jewish Agency paired kibbutz Nachal Oz with the communities of Atlanta and St. Louis, and I began to understand how much Jewish communities around the world care for us.
I am a 10th generation Jerusalemite whose family insisted that I would grow up learning about Jewish life and Jewish communities around the world. As a teenager, I participated in Jewish Agency programs that connected me with diaspora Jews, and I experienced that bond firsthand. Building bridges between Israel and Jews around the world became my calling. I knew I was meant to be a shlicha. And then I learned about the Jewish Agency Israel Fellows program, and I knew I was meant to be a campus fellow. When I arrived at Vanderbilt, I thought I understood my role. October 7th showed me I still had so much to learn. In those first days after the attacks, every instinct told me to go home and be with my family. But then, students started coming to my door, tearful, confused. They were hurting and facing questions from their peers who didn't understand why they cared so much. They didn't know how to process what they were feeling. They would scroll through their phones, see death and destruction, and wonder, why do I feel this so deeply in my bones? I became their guide through that confusion. I helped them understand that their pain is real, and their connection to Israel is real.
I never realized how much Jewish people around the world care about Israel. I saw it after October 7, and now I see it on campus every day. Even as our friends turn their back on them, these students see connection with our people, our history, and the country so many misunderstand.
American Jewish students choose Judaism even when it comes to a cost. We help them see that they are always connected to Israel. They're part of the same people, the same story. Thank you for entrusting us with the sacred work of connecting Israeli and diaspora Jews.
Thank you so much for standing with my community. Now I stand with yours. I came to UT Austin, grateful to serve, and I will live inspired by all I have received in return.
We are not separated communities,
We are one people.
connected by a living bridge.
Am
Am Yisrael Chai.
Please welcome the chairman of the executive of the Jewish Agency for Israel, Major General Doron Almog.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bar and Matan. We are so proud of your important work. The Jewish Agency work spans 75 countries around the world, and we have shlichim in every single one of them. In fact, this year, we have sent our largest group of shlichim ever. Because of your support, the Jewish Agency has sent 3,000 shlichim to your communities, summer camps, college campuses, and synagogues. Yes. They, the shlichim, they serve as an authentic living bridge to the state of Israel. Since the 7th of October 2023, the Jewish Agency has worked tirelessly with you and Jews around the world to strengthen Israel. Together, we have helped 8,000 business owners stay afloat through loans and grants. We have accompanied close to 20,000 families through our Victims of Terror Fund. We sent 800 Israel kids to North American summer camps this past summer. And with Jewish passion and involvement stronger than ever before, there have been a record 55,000 people who have made Aliyah since October 7. This work cannot be done alone. No person and no organization can do it by themselves. It takes all of us. Thank you for your support. Now is the time to do more. At this critical moment, we must strengthen Israel's north and south, driving growth in a population, the economy, and in education. The Jewish Agency, as the operational arm of the Jewish people, has the unique capacity to lead this effort through incentives, partnership, and initiatives that only an organization of its scale and mission can make possible. We are still in a great crisis, and we need you with us more than ever. We will allow every Jew around the world to be a part of rebuilding Israel through local shlichim, through volunteer work, and through our partnership networks that connect us all. I invite every Jew around the world to be part of this next step. The wound is deep, and we carry its pain with us every day, reminding us how vital it is to rebuild both physically and socially. Together, we are beginning a new chapter in the history of the Jewish people, a chapter commanding us to build exemplary society, loving, inclusive, united society. Striving for excellence in every field and never leave the weakest behind. Empowering light and hope for every Jew in the world. Am Israel Chai, thank you so much.
The Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, the architect of the Middle East peace process, has been assassinated.
We are the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, a people that has known tragedy, a people that has brought about miracles, a people that knows how to fight and how to make peace.
סבא, אתה היית, ואותך, הגיבור שלנו. אני רציתי שתדע שכל מה שעשיתי תמיד, ראיתי אותך לפני עיניי. הערכתך ואהבתך ליוו אותנו בכל צעד ובכל דרך, וחיינו לאור ערכיך תמיד.
Please welcome the granddaughter of former Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, Noah Rothman.
Thank you. Thank you very much, dear friends. It's very moving. Thank you so much. I'm very honored to be here today. When Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, an entire nation stood still. I was 18 and a half years old, almost the age as my eldest son is today. With the distance of years and through the influence of political actors and cultural shifts within Israeli society, a clear fracture point has emerged, a national scar, 30 years old. The assassination marked a boundary and a farewell, not only for a particularly sweet man I had the privilege to call my Saba, and not only from the courageous leader who stood at the center of the most decisive crossroads in the country's formative years. In many ways, it was the moment Israeli society as a whole lost its innocence that once characterized it. But more than anything, it was a rupture in our collective identity, one that Israel society still struggles to confront. At his funeral, which world leaders attended to pay their final respect, I spoke of the pillar of fire he had been for me, the head of my family, private family, and at the same time, the person who led the country. It feels odd to stress what was self-evident then. The camp I was referring, and I felt part of, was not a political camp. It was not a narrow milieu. The camp was the people of Israel. And at the highest of tension surrounding the peace process he led, after winning clear and legitimate political majority and navigating a complex coalition within a public debate reflecting a legitimate, value-based disagreement, Yitzhak Rabin said more than once how deeply he respected and listened to the citizens of the state, and above all, how committed he felt protecting all of them. Yes, even those who did not vote for him, and even those who criticized him. Yitzhak Rabin was a straight shooter. He was a passionate man, sometimes even violent. He taught me that disagreement is nothing to fear. On the contrary, it is the oldest Jewish sport. To engage in debate, one must stand firmly by one's convictions and lay things cut clear before the other side. Agreement is not required. Respect is. His attitude towards the rule of law and towards the fact that he was not above the law was never in a doubt. There were no internal winks, no coded exceptions. This is why I chose the image of this pillar of fire to express the kind of leadership I had the privilege to know up close. A man who inspired those around him without cursing and without preaching. A leader who demanded first and foremost from himself. A man who always took responsibility and understood that standing at the top is, before anything else, a burden of obligations, especially obligations of modesty, caution, and public service. Long before he asked anything for himself, he sought to achieve things for the people he served with love and devotion throughout his life. I have no essence to leave my children and grandchildren after me. I have only dreams. This is one of the most famous quotes, and not by chance. To my great sorrow, the assassination did not bring sobriety or unity. Instead, it deepened the divide. The tension continues to rise, and we have yet to find the places where we can all coexist in harmony and mutual respect. Yet, despite how worrying, dangerous, and heartbreaking this tension is, time and again, I do not believe it is our destiny. More than that, I believe wholeheartedly that only we can change the course of this repetitive, fear-driven cycle. But it will not happen unless we all act together. Not polished, filtered together. Not beautiful, orderly, photogenic together. The real together, the one that you have to compromise for. Only a shared willingness to create change so that life in Israel can be good for everyone, not only those who agree with each other. This does not apply only to politicians, but to all human beings. It is not a complicated path. It is daily, sometimes spontaneous. The more Israelis and Jewish member of communities who will choose it, the more chance we will create and we will achieve that. We can become pillars of fire for one another, leading with generous spirit and personal example. Don't look at me like this. I'm not naive. I am optimistic. Not only because my late grandfather remains profoundly relevant and deeply missed, even 30 years later, but because his spirit and his model of leadership still holds true. It may sound like a dream, but it's a worthy reality. And perhaps the best chance we have to fulfill that famous quote of his, turning it into a legacy that cherishes life and loves the people as much as he did. And most of all, a legacy of everything we have not yet stopped dreaming of, all that we can still be for all of us. So I thank you deeply for having me tonight and for commemorating the blessed memory of my late grandfather. And thank you all. Thank you very much.
השמש לעלות, לבוקר להאיר, הזעקה שבתפילות אותנו לא תחזיר. מי אשר קבע נרו ובעפר נטמן, בחימה לא יאירו, לא יחזירו לכאן. איש אותנו לא ישיב, מבור תחתית אפל, כאן לא יועילו לו שמחת הניצחון, ולא שירי הלל. לכן רק שירו שיר לשלום, אל תלחשו תפילה. מוטב תשירו שיר לשלום בצעקה גדולה. תנו לשמש לחדור מבעד לפרחים, אל תביטו לאחור, הניחו להולכים. שאו עיניים בתקווה, לא דרך כוונות, שירו שיר לאהבה ולא למלחמות. אל תגידו יום יבוא, הביאו את היום, כי לא חלום הוא בכל הכיכרות, הריעו רק שלום. לכן רק שירו שיר לשלום, אל תלחשו תפילה. מוטב תשירו שיר לשלום בצעקה גדולה. שירו שיר לשלום, אל תלחשו תפילה. מוטב תשירו שיר לשלום בצעקה גדולה.
Thank you.
Please welcome back our scholar in residence, Rabbi Angela Buchdahl.
We're so fortunate to have marked the 30th yahrzeit of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin with his granddaughter, His unthinkable assassination was seared into my memory because I was in my first year of rabbinical school in Israel when it happened. I remember being among the hundreds of thousands who filed past his casket, which lay in state in the courtyard of the Knesset. Seeing the throngs of Israelis walking through the streets with signs calling out, "Busha," shame, because no one could believe that a fellow Jew was who had murdered him. But of course, the story of Jew against Jew, brother against brother, is as old as the Bible, beginning with Cain and Abel. And Parshat Toldot this week begins with the story of Jacob and Esau, twin brothers who began warring in the womb. The Bible understood that perhaps the most challenging fights can happen within a family, and it cautions us to guard against this. As far back as we have been a Jewish people, we have had Jewish factions. In the time of the temple, they were known as Pharisees, Sadducees, Zealots, Essenes. Today, they go by other names: Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Mizrahi. At times, we have been plagued by infighting and disagreement. And we have no single leader, like a pope, who gets to speak for all the Jews. No single decider of Jewish practice, no final arbiter of God's word. But this is a feature, not a bug. In the 4th century, as Christianity was codifying the Nicene Creed, which mandated Christian dogmas as to what everyone had to believe, well, that's when Jews were codifying the Talmud, which reads more like a diary of greatest rabbinic disagreements. And it decidedly did not legislate what we as Jews had to believe. In that period, we had zugot, which were pairs of rabbinic houses that would disagree constantly over Jewish law, most famously the debating houses of Hillel and Shammai. And we do not study solo on mountaintops like monks. We study in noisy study halls in a Beit Midrash with a Hevruta, a study partner who sharpens our ideas through debating. Now, the most legendary Hevruta of the Talmudic period was between the learned Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was the head of the academy, and Reish Lakish, who was once a bandit with no formal training. But he did have insatiable curiosity and street smarts. Now, they were an odd couple, but they were perfect Hevruta, perfect sparring partners, because Lakish was unafraid to challenge Rabbi Yochanan, and they argued respectfully, except for one time, when Yochanan called up Lakish's sordid past as an outlaw. Lakish was so upset by this that he fell ill, and then he died. And Yochanan was inconsolable. So the community brought him a brilliant new Hevruta. It looked like a perfect match because every time Rabbi Yochanan made an argument, his new Hevruta would find the text that agreed with him. But it took only a few days before Rabbi Yochanan became exasperated. "I don't need you to tell me I'm right. I already know I'm right." When I used to argue with Reish Lakish, he would challenge me 24 times over until the matter became clear to us. "Where are you, Reish Lakish?" he cried out in anguish. But of course, Reish Lakish was gone. The Talmudic story ends when Rabbi Yochanan loses his mind, and then he too dies. You gotta love rabbinic legend. Now, when I heard this story, I finally understood the famous expression, "two Jews." Right. Now, that saying always perplexed me. If the joke was there to remind us that Jews always disagree, it would suffice it to say, "two Jews, two opinions." Where does that third opinion come from? Well, the story of Yochanan and Reish Lakish, their Hevruta, it teaches us. Because you see, they would argue their points with each other until the matter became clear to them. In other words, they came to a third opinion. Only by listening to opposing views could they arrive at a conclusion that transcended either of their original positions. It is in this tradition that we will hear our SAPIR debate today. In the Jewish spirit of dialogue, disagreement for the sake of heaven, and debating in order to sharpen our thinking and perhaps even to bring us closer to truth.
Please welcome the Chair of Israel and Overseas at the Jewish Federations of North America, Sarah Gottlieb, and the Director of the SAPIR Institute at the Maimonides Fund, Hanan Weissman.
All right, this is going to be the interactive part of the afternoon plenary. By a quick show of hands, over the past year, who has found themselves in a disagreement with a colleague over the events in Israel? Raise your hand. Okay, I'm seeing about 40%. All right, and by the way, I'm realizing that some of you might be sitting next to your bosses. Don't worry about it. It's dark, they can't see. It's fair game. Okay, who's gotten into an argument with a friend over the events of Israel? Raise your hand. Okay, about 3/4 of you. Now, what about with a member of your family? I see both my brothers raising their hand. Okay. Well, here's the reality. Whether you raised your hand or not, here's the truth. We are all the beneficiaries. We are the heirs of a tradition that values a good old-fashioned argument. As Rabbi Buchdahl just noted, since Abraham first argued with the Almighty, principled disagreement has been etched into the text, into the laws, into the stories that make up our heritage. As Rabbi David Wolpe wrote in the pages of the journal SAPIR, to err is human, to disagree, Jewish. As a community, we rightly take great pride in the idea that disputation is embedded in our cultural DNA. But that proverbial trait, left to its own devices, can also be a source of tension. 25 years ago, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs asked the following question: how do you create fraternity in a people as fractious as the Jews? The rabbi's answer, he said, lay in translating conflict into argument and making argument itself the pulse of intellectual life. Our tradition beckons us not to argue, or not just to argue, but to argue well, to argue better. And it is in that spirit that we created the SAPIR debates, to feature and to model spirited civil exchanges on the most consequential issues facing our Jewish community today.
And we are thrilled to bring the SAPIR debate to the General Assembly stage, right here with all of you. Our goal this afternoon is to continue strengthening a communal muscle that is also part of our lineage, one that prizes a good faith argument, challenges our preconceptions, and opens up the possibility of learning something new. So, as you listen, we ask you to do two things. First, lean in, not just to what you agree with, but to what makes you uncomfortable. And second, stay tuned to one of the debate's signature moments, a segment called One Good Point. At the end of the debate, our moderator will ask each participant to highlight one argument from the other side that they found compelling. It's not easy. In fact, it's quite hard. It requires active listening, critical thinking, and the humility to entertain a new perspective. But that's what this space and this community are all about.
If you are sitting in this audience, the 2,000 of you, your voice is instrumental to today's program, because at both the beginning and at the end of the debate, we'll ask you to vote on this evening's question: is there a realistic future for the two-state solution? We will reveal the results at the conclusion to see whether and how opinions have shifted or not. So let's get started. If you haven't yet, please take out your phones and register your vote by scanning the QR code on your playbill or using the screen behind us. Again, your take: is there a realistic future for the two-state solution, yes or no? And lest there be any concern, this is all completely anonymous.
As you cast your votes, it's my pleasure to introduce the moderator of today's debate. Tamar Ish-Shalom is an award-winning journalist and one of the most recognized news anchors on Israeli television. For more than a decade, she anchored the primetime edition of Channel 10 News. Today, she serves as a senior fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute and hosts the podcast Jewish Crossroads, where she explores the challenges and possibilities of Jewish life today. Please join us in welcoming Tamar Ish-Shalom to the General Assembly stage.
Thank you, Sarah and Hanan, for that warm introduction. It's an honor to be on this illustrious stage at the General Assembly and to moderate this SAPIR debate on the question before us this evening. Is there a realistic future for the two-state solution? When the Oslo Accords were signed, I was a girl of bat mitzvah age. My family lived near the Foreign Ministry's official residence in Jerusalem, and the neighbor in that house was Foreign Minister Shimon Peres. On the eve of Rosh Hashanah, I went around delivering handmade holiday cards I prepared to our neighbors. When I reached his residence, the security guard invited me to step inside and give it to him personally. It was before the assassination of Prime Minister Rabin, a moment when such things were still possible. A week later, I received a formal letter in the mail from Minister Peres. He thanked me for the card and wrote that he hoped that one day the relations between us and our Palestinian neighbors would be as warm as those between the neighbors on our street. That hope did not materialize, nor did the new Middle East he envisioned. Of course, the new Middle East has emerged before our eyes over the past 2 decades, perhaps better in some ways and worse in others, but certainly very different from the dreams of Oslo. For some, it can feel as though our political imagination has remained frozen in time. The fundamental disagreements between supporters and opponents of a Palestinian state persist, yet the relevance of the discussion has drifted far from the daily lives of Israelis, especially over the past decade. Surveys show that for many Israelis, the attacks of October 7 pushed the idea of a peaceful Palestinian state even further out of reach. Yet internationally, 2 years later, we see renewed attention to the two-state concept. Recently, several Western nations recognized the state of Palestine, while Saudi Arabia, pressured by President Trump to move toward normalization with Israel, signaled that any deal would require Israel to reconsider its stance on a Palestinian state. For decades, the majority of American Jews have supported the paradigm of 2 states for 2 people, in part because it was perceived as the only resolution that enabled Israel to retain its Jewish and democratic character. And yet, of late, we're beginning to see cracks in support for the viability of this ideal, even among some mainstream Jewish organizations. So, tonight, we ask the essential question: is there a realistic future for the two-state solution? There are no easy answers, of course, but we are very fortunate to have on stage 2 distinguished individuals to help us unpack these heavy issues. Answering yes to tonight's proposition is Michael Koplow. Michael is the Chief Policy Officer for the Israel Policy Forum, an organization dedicated to building support for a secure Jewish democratic Israel and to advancing a resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict based on 2 states. Please join me in welcoming Michael Koplow. And answering no to the proposed question is John Podhoretz. John serves as editor of Commentary Magazine, which this month celebrated 80 years Since its founding, John is also the host of its popular daily podcast. Please join me in welcoming John Podhoretz. Shalom Chaverim. Hello, friends. And we will begin with opening remarks from both of our speakers. As for who will start, that was decided by a quick coin toss backstage, which was a challenge because everyone is cashless these days. But thankfully, very deep in my purse, I found 10 Israeli shekel coin. And the one starting is you, John. So you're first to address an identical question. Is there a realistic future for the two-state solution?
There is a future for the two-state solution. It is not a realistic future at the present time or for at least a generation. Let me just take you back 88 years to July 7th, 1937, the first proposal of a two-state solution. The Peel Commission convened and proposed a two-state solution, 80% Arab, 20% Jew. Jews believed at the time that this was a betrayal of the promise made by Arthur Balfour in the Balfour Declaration, which was pretty much for the entire mandate shebang, and urged many people in the Yishuv, urged David Ben-Gurion to reject the deal, and he did not. He accepted the Peel Commission's recommendation, and the Arab population of Mandatory Palestine rejected it. 1937, 1947, 1948, partition plan at the UN, accepted by Israel or by the Jews, rejected by the Arabs who started a 22-state war against Israel, settled with an armistice in 1949. 1967, after the Six-Day War, Arab countries met in Khartoum, trying to figure out what to do after this devastating loss, and they came up with 3 no's. Did they come up with, let's make a deal with the Israelis? No. No peace, no negotiations, no recognition, the 3 no's of Khartoum. 1993, the Oslo Accords, a two-state solution formally agreed to by Israel and in theory by the newly invented Palestinian Authority that was to begin its process toward the creation of a Palestinian state after a 4-year period in which Israel would make certain guarantees and commit certain changes in Israeli law over the sovereignty over the West Bank and Gaza in exchange for the Palestinians rejecting terrorism. What happened? Okay. April 6, 1994, in Afula, 8 killed by a bombing. In Hadera, April 13th, 1994, 5 killed. In Tel Aviv, on the 19th of October, 94, 78 casualties on the number 5 bus. On Jaffa Road in January of 1996, 2 bombings of bus 18, killing 80, wounding 143, leading in large measure to the first premiership of Benjamin Netanyahu. Camp David, 2000, two-state solution agreed to by Ehud Barak. Land swaps, 95% of the West Bank in Palestinian hands. Yasser Arafat rejects the deal. Israel accepts the deal. At Camp David, it later, in December and January of 2000-2001, deal is re-proposed. Yasser Arafat rejects it. He says to Bill Clinton, "You are a great man." Bill Clinton says, "I am a failure and you made me one." And in response, launches the second intifada, not Bill Clinton, Yasser Arafat launches the second intifada, which leads to, hold on, about 10,000 Israeli casualties between dead and wounded from 2000 until 2005. Nonetheless, in 2008, Ehud Olmert, somewhat accidental prime minister taking office after the stroke of Ariel Sharon proposes 93% of the West Bank to the Palestinians, the deal is rejected. These are the times that Israel has agreed to a two-state solution, and the Arabs have not. And what do the Arabs do in the wake of all of these? They commit wars. They commit atrocities. They commit acts of terrorism. And here we are in 2025, Israel having fought now a gigantic war against Hamas, Iran, Hezbollah, and Syria and Yemen, simply to preserve its own sovereignty, independence as a functional existing Jewish state. There is no peace to be had.
Thank you very much, John. And we're heading to you, Michael.
What's the dream of Zionism? There's a very easy shorthand. It's a secure Jewish democratic Israel. And obviously in the wake of October 7th, it's difficult, if not impossible, for many people to think about a secure Jewish democratic Israel that comes about as a result of two states. But the two-state option is the only thing that will achieve all three of these. And I'll go through them quickly one by one. Let's start with secure. If we'd been sitting in this room 50 years ago, I'll take us back a little bit in history as well. If we'd been sitting in this room 50 years ago, all of us would have been sitting here talking about the fact that there will never be peace between Israel and Egypt. Egypt had fought with Israel in 1948, in 1956, in 1967, in 1973, had sponsored or abetted countless Fedayeen attacks from Gaza, territory that Egypt controlled. I'll venture a guess that nobody in this room would have thought 50 years ago that there would be peace between Israel and Egypt not even half a decade later. And what have we seen in the wake of that? What we've seen is that Egyptians don't like Israelis any more than they did before. Attitudes toward Israel and Jews in Egypt are still pretty terrible. But what creates a durable peace? It's an agreement. It's a border. It's being able to deal with another entity as opposed to what we have now with the Palestinians, where there's this amorphous back and forth. When we think about security, we also have to look at what we've seen over the last couple of years. Israel was attacked by Iranian missiles 3 times. And one of the lessons from those 3 volleys is that Israel's security depended on a lot of other actors, a lot of other countries. For all that Israelis want to be able to defend themselves by themselves, that's not the world we live in. And as we've all seen here in the United States, support for Israel on both sides is at risk. A lot of that has to do with the failure to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The ability of states in the region to keep on helping Israel depends in large measure on resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And so from a security standpoint, obviously, 2 states carries a lot of risks. But in the long term, the only way to really keep Israel secure is to figure out how to resolve this conflict in 2 states. When we think about a Jewish state, so there are the arguments that people all know about demographics. In 2021, the IDF testified before the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee that between the river and the sea, there are now more non-Jews than there are Jews. Separation is required if Israel is going to remain a Jewish state. But that's not the only way to look at it. Israel aspires to be a Jewish state not only for Jews in Israel, but for Jews around the world. And as we know, sitting in this room full of American Jews, for many American Jews, their connection to Israel is becoming much weaker and more tenuous. And that too, much of it, has to do with the failure to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And if we want Israel to be a Jewish state in this more expansive sense, there has to be some sort of political resolution. Finally, there's the issue of Israel as a democracy. And here too, there are all the issues that are associated with Israel's military occupation of the West Bank. But there's another problem, which is that leaving aside the democratic effects on Palestinians and what it means for Israel to be democratic, military occupation is corrosive to democracy. This isn't unique to Israel. It would happen to any country. And we're sitting here now, decades after the 1967 war, a war that Israel did not want, and after an occupation that Israel did not want to have to do. But the longer it goes on unresolved, the more shaky Israel's democratic character becomes. And so is 2 states an option for today? Absolutely not. Is it a perfect option that will solve all problems? Absolutely not. It's why I never talk about a two-state solution, only a two-state option. But ultimately, if we want a secure Jewish democratic Israel, the only way to get there is two states.
Thank you very much, Michael. John, October 7 taught Israelis that the idea so many had embraced, the notion of conflict management, what we call in Hebrew nihul hasichsuch, was an illusion and a dangerous one. So if not two states for two peoples and not conflict management, what is the serious, credible, and viable alternative that can ensure Israel's Jewish and democratic character? Is it one state? Is it three state? Is it the current status quo?
The current status quo is what will be. So to address the matter as though, as I think Michael does, there is a two-state option when there is no two-state option is to live in a world of fantasy rather than in a world of reality. If the problem is that there needs to be a resolution of this for Israel to remain Jewish and democratic, or for there to be the proper treatment of the Palestinians, resolutions require two parties to come to an agreement. And the history that I just outlined is a 90-year history of the Jews seeking agreement and the Arabs attacking them with violence and bombs and buses and cutting through fences and rapes and slaughters and hostage taking. The resolution cannot be a one-sided resolution. The tragedy of what we saw in 2023 was that the one time that Israel attempted to impose a unilateral solution through the unilateral disengagement with Gaza, the removal of all Israeli troops from Gaza, the destruction of the 3 settlements in Gaza, and making Gaza Judenrein, was 18 years of missiles and bombs, Israel protected by Iron Dome, until it became clear to Hamas that they had another path, that they could dig underground, and that they could cut through fences, they could make friends with the populations, the idealistic populations of 3 kibbutzim in the Gaza envelope, make friends with them, figure out a way to act like they were coexisting with them, draw maps of those 3 kibbutzim, cut through the fences on October 7th, slaughter the people in Be'eri and Nir Oz, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the 3rd settlement, I apologize. And of course, then rampage through the Nova Festival. That was because Israel attempted to impose a resolution, not an agreement. It was, we will separate from you. We understand you hate us. We're not going to administer Gaza anymore. We give it to you. We are leaving it to you. And what did Hamas do in Gaza once it won? It began to create the conditions under which it was in a state of permanent, though on and off war with Israel from the time that the first missiles began to fly at Tel Aviv, over 15 years, until finally they cut through the fence. And 3 major wars that happened between Israel and Gaza as a result of the missile attacks. So no resolution through a unilateral move, no resolution with the Palestinian Authority, which rejected the one major deal that was offered in 2008 after the Gaza disengagement. I don't know what option there is until there is a change in the character, personality, and spiritual understanding of the world of the Palestinian people, as there apparently was with Egypt in 1977 or 1976 when Sadat got on the plane and went to Jerusalem, and then there was a peace between Israel and Egypt because an Arab country said, I want peace with you.
Let's give Michael a chance to address, do you live in a fantasy, as John says, and do we have a partner?
I think that to expect there to be a two-state resolution tomorrow or even next year is absolutely a fantasy. But that's not the question here. The question is whether there's a realistic future for it. I actually want to pick up on what John started with Gaza disengagement, because I think Gaza disengagement, there are many lessons from it. But there's one interesting thing that John said that actually I'm not sure is correct, which is that disengagement was in 2005 and that there were then 18 years of rockets and missiles. There weren't 18 years of rockets and missiles. There were 16 years of rockets and missiles, because that started not in 2005 with disengagement. It started in 2007 when Hamas, in a violent coup, overthrew the Palestinian Authority and took over Gaza. Now, what's the lesson in that? The lesson to me is that we can't look at all of these entities as the same. The Palestinian Authority is not ready for two states today either. But just as the Arab world shifted over time, just as we saw peace agreements with Egypt and Jordan, just as we saw the Abraham Accords in 2020, just as today we have Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi crown prince, coming to this city tomorrow, where I don't expect there will be a Saudi normalization agreement, but there will certainly be discussion about it. We've seen these attitudes change over time, and to view all Arab countries as the same is a mistake. To view all Palestinians the same is a mistake. The reason I say there's a realistic future for two states is because I do believe that there are Palestinians that Israel can work with. They don't exist today. They aren't there in the form they need to be in. It's why we have to take what happens on the Palestinian side seriously. It's why we have to actually treat the Palestinians as if they have agency. It's why we can't just hand them something and say, this is yours now, you have to go deal with it. It's
But
why
Michael, beyond that, if we see on both societies, not only on the Palestinian society, a large majority, Israeli and Palestinian, oppose the two-state solution. In most recent polls, 60% of Israelis and 57% of Palestinians. The question is, hasn't the time come to listen to what both peoples are actually saying, rather than continuing to impose from the outside an idea that neither side seems to believe in anymore?
I'd like to agree with Mike. I think we have a very important agreement here. Things have changed in the Middle East, remarkably. Sadat was the first major change, even though that was 50 years ago. He was assassinated for it, but the peace has held. The Camp David peace has held. Over the last 10 years, or over the last 7, whatever it is, the Abraham Accords have shown a remarkable path forward for countries that were extraordinarily inimical to the Zionist experiment. We have seen change in the United States and Israel getting together and destroying in 12 days, the Iranian 37 hours really, but a 12-day war that concluded with Israel destroying and America destroying the Iranian nuclear program, with results that we don't even quite know what they will lead to. Could there be a sea change in the Palestinian understanding of how to live in the future in a world in which they accept that Israel, which is 80 years old and is now has established its existence and its permanence through this conflict over the last 2 years, exactly as Herzl would have foretold it could? Can that happen? Yes, it can happen. Israel cannot make it happen. There is not a thing that Israel can do to make it happen. It has to happen within the soul of Palestine. How that happens isn't us agreeing as part of the 20-point plan that the educational system in Gaza should change. It should change, but just like disengagement, it cannot be that it will change as a result of a top-down series of pressures from leaders of other countries. There has to be an understanding that there is a better way to live than the way that they are living now.
Michael?
And that cannot be imposed upon them.
I agree, it can't be imposed upon them. I'll answer your question too, but I want to quickly just follow up on John's point. I agree, it can't be imposed upon them, and there has to be real change within Palestinian society. But there are things that Israel can do, and I want to bring one quick historical example. we talk all the time, and especially in the wake of October 7th, when we talk about de-radicalization on the Palestinian side, we talk all the time about the examples of World War II and what happened in post-Nazi Germany and what happened in post-imperial Japan. And I think one of the important lessons from those two places is that the Germans and the Japanese after World War II, they were working towards something tangible. They weren't being told, listen, you guys have to accept temporary occupation from the Allied powers before you put your countries back together. You have to rewrite your constitutions. You have to change your education system. You have to de-radicalize entirely. You have to demilitarize. And after you do all that, at the end, maybe we'll have a conversation about what your political entity looks like at the end. Germans and Japanese knew that when they did this at the end of the process, they were going to get their states back. And so they had an incentive to do all these things. I think something important that Israel can do if we want to try and spur these critical reforms and changes on the Palestinian side is to say to them, there is an end to this process. And at the end of this process, you get the thing you want, as opposed to do these things and then maybe we'll have a conversation later.
I need to completely and utterly disagree with you on this analysis of Germany and Japan. Germany and Japan were destroyed. The regimes were destroyed. They were left in ruins and rubble. We did occupy Germany for 5 years. So did the Soviets. We occupied Japan for 7 years. We wrote Japan's constitution. We made Germany, we forced Germany to create a new kind of political system that was imposed from above and by a kind of defeat that Israel did not visit upon Hamas or visit upon the Palestinian Authority. You want to use that example? Israel should go into Jenin and, I don't know where, Jericho and Hebron and all over the West Bank and level the West Bank and then say, okay, it's time to rebuild. We're writing you a constitution. I don't think Israel should do this. I'm saying, I do not. I am saying that the historical example you're using directly violates your own hope.
Michael?
I think you were drawing some inadvertent applause. First of all, Israel has gone into
Without going back to Japan and Germany, okay?
Yes.
Let's talk.
First of all, Israel has gone into Jenin. The Jenin refugee camp is gone. We see Israel doing some of these things. And I also think that, to my earlier point, to equate Hamas and the Palestinian Authority as if they're the same and that both of them, Hamas I'm not going to argue with, are like Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, I don't think is the right analogy. But to go back to your question about attitudes of two states. So absolutely, majorities of Israelis and Palestinians right now do not support two states. And I wouldn't expect them to. As I said, I think it would be madness for a majority of Israelis to sit here today, 2 years after October 7th, while there are still remaining bodies of hostages in Gaza and say, we support two states. But what you do see in polling is that a plurality of Israelis support separation from the Palestinians. And that's not the same thing as two states, but it's the beginning of the process, and which is why when we talk about, is there a realistic future, the first step is this recognition that Israelis and Palestinians should not be intertwined as much as possible. They need to separate. They need to each have their own entities. Neither of them is going anywhere, and separation is the first step. And once you accept that Israelis and Palestinians, and again, even today, pluralities of both, say what they want is separation from the other side, once you accept that, you at least have some sort of common ground to then figure out what changes have to happen and how do you get to a point where you can make it more durable and you make it into an actual two-state arrangement. Again, that's not today, but it can happen.
Thank you, Michael. John, I want to jump in with a question, if I may. As of September 2025, 156 out of 193 UN member states recognize Palestine, including the UK, France, Canada, and Australia. That's more than 80% of countries worldwide, and close to the number of states that actually recognize Israel. And even the Trump plan, with its 21 clauses, includes one affirming the Palestinians' right to statehood. And needless to say, Trump is a great ally of Israel. So is it wise that the Israeli government indefinitely ignore increasingly global calls to create a Palestinian state?
Yes. I mean, it's wise if somebody tells you that there is a storm coming and there's a 100% chance that your house will wash away in a flood and that you'd better build a flood wall in order to prevent your house from being washed away in a flood, and you don't do it because 156 satrapies, dictatorships, and human rights abusers wag their finger at you and say that that's really not the right thing to do, I don't think that you should listen to them or heed them. That is not the way the world works. If they want to live in a fantasy in which Israel may no longer exist, as most of them do, if they want to live in a fantasy that they can coddle their internal populations by indulging in the delusion that Israel can, the Jewish state can be somehow eliminated, which I think is what's behind the UN vote, they can do so. Israel is the smallest country with the largest military footprint the world has practically ever seen. It has that military footprint in order to protect itself from precisely this effort to delegitimize the very idea of Zionism and Jewish self-sovereignty. And the Trump plan is not part and parcel of this. The Trump plan says if these 20 steps are taken, it may be time to look to a Palestinian state. And with that, I wholly agree, because those steps that are outlined in the Trump plan would mean a civilizing effect on the Palestinian populace and the Palestinian polity that would make it a partner in a new Middle East that could feature Jews and Palestinians living side by side. As for the idea of separation between Israel and the Palestinians, the Oslo plan and the Olmert plan and the Camp David plan, all three presumed a separation between Israel and the Palestinians. That's what the land swaps were about. That was the idea that you could separate these populations in places that they already lived. And again, the Jews said yes and the Palestinians said no. And they said no 3 times. So for you, 18 years later, to say this is still a viable option, I don't understand how you can look at the world as it is and the experience that we have gone through in the course of my lifetime and say that there is a partnership with the people that you want to separate from who are saying, you know what, we're not going to agree to separate from you because our dream is to wipe you off the map. Even though you are way stronger than we are, and you are way more powerful and richer, you've gone from being the 104th richest country in the world to the 26th richest country in the world, while we have been immiserating here in poverty, and still our hope is that you will be destroyed. Those people are the ones who are preventing the separation of the Jews and the Palestinians, not the Jews. The Jews have agreed.
John,
3 times they have agreed.
John, you mentioned viability, and that is my next question to you, Michael. When the Oslo Accords were signed, there were over 100,000 Israeli settlers in the West Bank. 3 decades later, that number has grown to over 500,000. Now, even within Israel's political left, more and more voices are saying we've crossed the point of no return. The two-state solution, they argue, is no longer viable because you simply can't uproot more than 500,000 people from their homes. So could it be that by now the two-state solution is simply no longer feasible?
So you don't actually have to uproot 500,000 people. John referenced the land swaps that were built into Oslo and other Camp David, the 2008 Olmert Abbas talks. 80% of the Israelis living over the Green Line live on 4% of the territory. And that 4% of the territory are the Jewish neighborhoods of East Jerusalem and the 5 large settlement blocks along the Green Line. That 4%, that's the land swap. So without moving even one Israeli, you capture 80% of the Israelis living over the Green Line. And by the way, the 500,000 is just Israelis in the West Bank. If we talk about Israelis in East Jerusalem, we're adding another about 250,000. So 80% of that entire group stays exactly where they are in a two-state arrangement. Now you're still left with 20%, and that's very difficult. There isn't a good solution. It certainly isn't going to be to go in and uproot them all by force. It's probably going to be a combination of things, from paying people money to voluntarily relocate to giving people the option to stay where they are, the same way that we are all very proud of the fact that there are Israeli Arabs who are citizens of Israel. There's absolutely no reason at all why Jews who want to stay deep inside the West Bank shouldn't be given the option to live as residents of the state of Palestine. They keep their Israeli citizenship and they stay where they are. And there may be some who do have to be moved, but I don't think that the numbers, when we look at how many Israelis live inside the West Bank, are actually a barrier to a solution in the future.
Let's stay with the numbers, because I want to ask you, John, under the assumption that a two-state solution is impossible, what should the Israeli government do with the estimated 3 million Palestinians living in the West Bank? Should it annex the territory and give Palestinians Israeli citizenship?
No. It should not.
So what should it do? And stay Jewish and democratic?
They don't want to be annexed. Once again, you are imposing a solution from above. They clearly do not want to be part of the Israeli national experiment. I don't think they should be. I think that would threaten the Jewish character of the Jewish state. But let's say that it were an option that were brought to a plebiscite on the West Bank. It would be rejected probably 80% to 20%. So you don't force people to become citizens of your country if you know, I mean, I guess that's not the way anybody has ever done anything, and you can't do it that way. So again, if we live in the real world, what is to be done about them? What is to be done about them is nothing. By which I mean, I don't think, unlike many friends of mine, I do not think that Israel should annex the West Bank and claim sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. However, I do not think that Israel is obliged to do any more than it has already done. And you describe what is going on in Judea and Samaria as a military occupation. It is a very peculiar kind of military occupation, if so. It is a military occupation done entirely and arranged entirely for the defense of the Jewish populations on the West Bank. It is not a colonial administrator. It is not seeking to force the indigenous population to do things that will enrich the colonial power. It is there to protect the Israelis who live in Gilo, in the Gush, in the 80% who live there. And in fact, a lot of Israelis are, of course, often very angry or hostile about the settlers who require protection when they set themselves up in places that are beyond those boundaries, because it is a threat to the lives of the soldiers who have to protect them. This is an interesting domestic problem that is resolvable within the Israeli domestic political program, were it not for the fact that the settlers are citizens and they also have the rights to vote and they also exercise political power, and the governments are formed with that in mind. I want to remind you, by the way, everybody here, if there are people here who don't like the settlements and hate the settlements were a Labor Party project after 1967. Remember, the Likud did not come into power in Israel until 1977. The idea of settling the West Bank and putting settlements in Gaza was a Labor Party idea about how to project power closer to Jordan and closer to Egypt as a defensive and protective maneuver for Israel. This is not a fantastical Jabotinskyite, Lehi, Irgun, monstrous effort to eat up all Arab lands and take over the world for the Jews, which
John,
a lot of very left-wing Jews.
Let's see if you convinced Michael. Okay,
Okay.
Michael, could it work?
So all
Do
of that-
nothing? John's suggestion.
I don't think it could work. All of that is true. The settlements absolutely were a labor project, but let's think about what settlements those were. Those were the settlements in what's known as the Jerusalem Triangle that were meant to widen the approach from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and create security for Israel. And by the way, that's the 4% that are in the large blocks that are going to stay. The labor governments that started the settlement project for security purposes, and they were legitimate security purposes, and they remain so today in those areas didn't contemplate what we have today. As to whether it can work to keep the status quo forever, I don't think that it can. And we're seeing it break down on a number of fronts, whether it is the fact that more and more IDF soldiers are being diverted to the West Bank to deal with the security situation there, a problem that is only going to grow as more Israelis move deeper into the West Bank. The total population doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is where they are, and where they're going creates a much bigger security burden on the IDF. We're seeing in all sorts of ways, I mentioned the erosion of support for Israel here in the United States. We're seeing it across the world as well. And frankly, the thing that worries me the most is that we saw a horrible phenomenon here on October 8th, 2023, which is that many of us assumed that the problem was a 1967 problem, that the reason people were opposed to Israel was because of what happened after 1967. And on October 8th, many of us were treated to a really ugly reality, which is that for many people on the other side, their problem was 1948. Their problem was Israel's existence. We're sitting here today where, and I'll put a positive spin on what's happening at the UN. I'm not a fan of unilateral recognition of Palestinian statehood. I don't think it's a good idea, and frankly, there's only one country that has to recognize Palestine that matters, and that's Israel. But what we're seeing from these countries is they're saying, we want to treat this as a 1967 problem. We want Israel alongside an independent Palestine. And my concern is that the longer the status quo goes on and there's no resolution, we're going to take many of these people who are still in a 1967 world, which is the world I think we want to be in, and we're going to move them over to a 1948 world. But in the 1948 world, there's no way out of this.
I want to jump in with a question that's very relevant to what you're saying, because 82% of Palestinians in the West Bank supported Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel in the immediate aftermath. That is 4 out of every 5 Palestinians in the West Bank. It's a shocking number. Now, critics of the two-state solution long argue that the failure to implement the Oslo Accords, that the failure was not circumstantial. It wasn't the leaders, it wasn't the timing, it wasn't the extremists on both sides. Ultimately, it was the inability of the Palestinian national movement to truly accept the existence of the State of Israel. So doesn't October 7th prove that the assessment is accurate?
They're really ugly numbers. Nobody should try to justify them or wave them away. The very first piece I wrote after October 7th was about the fact that it wasn't just 3,000 Nukhba terrorists that came over the border. We saw ordinary Palestinians coming to Otef Aza, to the communities in the Gaza envelope, and looting as well. It was something that is not justified. But to look at that and say, therefore we are fated to war until the end of time, I don't think is correct. I think that what we need to do is, A, pay attention to the Palestinians who are not saying that, and for all of the horrible, huge, deep flaws of the Palestinian Authority, the leadership of the PA is not part of that group. And I think we need to work on the things that have to be done to actually change Palestinian opinion. Again, nobody's suggesting handing them a state tomorrow. That would be suicide for Israel. But if we're talking about is there a realistic future for it, then we have a lot of things to work on. But to rule it out, I really fear dooms this Zionist project of a secure Jewish democratic Israel for good.
Michael, thank you. And I want to squeeze in another question before your concluding remarks, and that would be to you, John. While the Abraham Accords certainly proved that Israel can make huge diplomatic progress without a deal with the Palestinians, Saudi Arabia has made clear that full normalization will require movement toward a Palestinian state. So could it be that the Accords delayed but did not eliminate the need for a Palestinian state in order to get normalization in the region?
I do not believe that you should believe that the Saudi Arabians are going to be prevented from making an Abraham Accords deal by the failure to create a Palestinian state. I think that's a smokescreen and a dodge and a gambit on the part of Mohammed bin Salman and the Saudi regime. In fact, I think moving aside the Palestinian Authority from this conversation, securing the victory over Hamas in Gaza, which I believe has happened, and I believe this war was an overwhelming success for Israel on all of these fronts, was the final necessary step to make the Abraham Accords possible, that in truth, in the background, in the corridors of power, in the rooms in which people actually make these decisions, what makes Israel attractive as a future partner in the new Middle East that was seen by Shimon Peres, but misunderstood by Shimon Peres, that it's Israel's showing that it is willing to do what it must do to protect itself, and protect itself as the future of the Middle East in terms of tech, in terms of innovation, military, technological, helping develop NEOM in Saudi Arabia, oil fields in the Med, and fracking under Israeli sands and all of that. That is the country that Saudi Arabia wishes to emulate now, not to destroy, and it had to show finally this test of its mettle, its existential mettle. And if we see an Abraham Accords happen in the next year, it will be because Israel did not say, we have to go to a two-state solution, or we need to deal with the Palestinians. It's that we need to defeat our enemies and move forward into the future.
Thank you, John. Well, friends, we are heading towards the end of this debate, and very shortly we will vote. You guys will vote for the second time. But beforehand, it's time for your short closing remarks, and we're switching the order from the beginning. So, Michael, you're starting.
So I'm going to do something unconventional. I'm going to end with a joke. God goes to the US president, the premier of communist China, and the Israeli prime minister. And he says, I have to let you know that in 3 days I'm going to destroy the world. The president goes on TV. He says, my fellow Americans, I have one piece of good news and one piece of bad news. The good news is that God exists. The bad news is that he's going to destroy the world in 3 days. The premier of communist China goes on TV. He says, my fellow comrades, I have two pieces of very bad news. The first is that God exists. We were wrong. The second is that he's going to destroy the world in 3 days. The Prime Minister of Israel goes on TV. He said, citizens of Israel, I have two pieces of great news. The first, God exists. We've been right all along. And the second is that he told me there's never going to be a Palestinian state. I tell the joke because I actually think it illustrates something important, which is that in all of the back and forth over yes or no Palestinian state, we often lose sight of the larger picture. And the larger picture here is that Israel cannot exist in the world alone. It's like every other country. John is correct when he talks about the strength of the IDF and the vitality of the Israeli economy and the incredible resourcefulness of the Israeli people. And even a country like that can't exist alone. It simply cannot. And I think that unless Israel figures out a way to, at some point down the road, get to a two-state outcome with the Palestinians, then we will constantly be fighting over this two-state issue, and we'll be losing the larger picture of what is ultimately best for Israel and for its future.
Thank you, and thank you for being precisely 2 minutes. John.
Okay, I love this joke approach, so I'm going to follow you. Two Jews go before a firing squad. And the head of the firing squad says, do you have any last requests? And Sam says, I would like, please, a blindfold. And Abe says, Sam, don't make trouble. In my view, I loved your joke, by the way. I want to point that out. That's why I'm...
I have to credit, not my joke, Martin didn't.
I didn't prepare a joke. Okay. See, they didn't tell me. I don't have a third joke now.
Okay. I tell this joke because it is a deep reflection of one part of the Jewish character, which is, can we just not make trouble? You're coming at us, you're going to shoot us, let's not make trouble. Part two of the ancillary to that is, if we only, as Jews, do some things that will pacify our enemies, we will be able to move forward in a healthy way in which they leave us alone. We are left to say the Shema and keep kosher and circumcise our children as we are bid to do, and all of that. And it turns out, as Herzl and Jabotinsky both perceived, that nearly the opposite is true. We have to make trouble, because if trouble is made for us, we have to have the power and the ability to make trouble back double for the people who trouble us. This, again, is not about the West Bank per se, but it is about the idea in the world that Jews, in their national project, that national project is conditional and can be destroyed. And if we do not commit ourselves, we here, as supporters of Israel, and Israelis who put their lives on the line every day in the Israeli national project, to the notion that the world is going to have to accept that we do not, we will exist, and we will take on the comers who say that we will not, and we will do it here in the United States when they come at us on college campuses and in our neighborhoods, that we are here, we are staying, and we're not the ones who are going to need a blindfold, and we are not going to say to each other, don't make trouble anymore, because we do not have that option. We are under threat. We are as powerful as we have ever been on this earth, and we are more under threat in some ways than we have ever been on this earth. And we therefore, we are obliged for our children and our children's children to make it clear to the world that the Jews are here to stay and that Israel is here to stay. And if that involves finally...
I do not have a buzz. I don't have a buzzer.
Okay, but
it's...
Okay, let me just...
We'll be past our 2 minutes.
If we do not get to a point, we can get to a point at which there is a two-state solution. When what I just said is accepted by the Palestinians and by the world entire, and we will not until it is.
Thank you very much, John and Michael. Now comes the moment that our audience is going to vote for the second time, and I'm very curious to find out how many of you changed your minds, how many of you were persuaded by the opposing side, and it will take a few moments. So while you are voting here in the audience, we will take advantage of that time for a rather unusual thing in these times of heated debate, and I will ask both of you in a minute or so to say one good point that you heard expressed by your opponent today. Do you want to start?
Sure. This is not hard for me. John said a lot of things that I agree with. I'll actually do two. One is that I think he's 100% right, that Israel can't do this by itself. It's not going to be able to just snap its fingers and create two states, even if it wants to. It requires real work on the other side, and it is not in Israel's power to do on its own. And I think the sloganeering about, and the occupation now, or if Israel were to just do A, B, and C, this would be done, that is absolutely a fantasy. And so I think that's a great point. And then second, what you closed with, I agreed as well. Until the other side absolutely and implacably accepts that Israel is not going anywhere, then we're not going to get to two states.
That's very generous of you, because I asked for one good argument, you gave us two, and we're on to you, John.
That was very generous of you, and I will say that in the fundamental sense, I don't think that we disagree. I think what we disagree with is a timeline, or maybe a question of what policy provisions need to be adopted at present or in the near future. I do not see much hope for policy prescriptions in the near future that will lead to Israel and the Palestinians living in peace side by side in two states. I do believe that if we pursue, and I believe that, as you suggest, if we pursue this with an idea that the time for this is in the future and that things need to happen in the future to lead to that prospect and that possibility, that we will reach that eventually. I don't know if it's going to be in my lifetime, to be frank, but I believe Israel is eternal. I believe Jerusalem is its eternal capital, and I believe, therefore, that we have the time necessary to get to this final end that you yourself see.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Michael. And as we wait for the results, it will take just a few more moments. I would like to thank all of you as well, our engaged audience. It's hard to be open-minded these days to opposing ideas, especially in these kinds of delicate issues. And let's see the results now. So, as we can see, we certainly have a winner. Congratulations, John. The needle has moved from yes in the first vote, 47%, it went down to 33%, and from 53% saying no in the first vote, we've come to 67%. Thank you very much for a terrific debate. Shalom and todah.
This concludes the afternoon program. Please consult the conference app for this evening's events and receptions. See you for breakfast tomorrow morning, beginning at 7 a.m.
בקרוב תזרח השמש, נדע ימים יפים מאלה, הלב נלחם בדאגות. כולם יחזרו הביתה, נחכה להם למטה, הלוואי נדע בשורות טובות. כי עם הנצח לעולם לא מפחד, אפילו כשקשה לראות. כולם ביחד